I do want to make one note, and that is this webinar is being recorded. That means that when we do open up for Q&A, which we'll do with a raising our hands process that our technical advisor will tell you about, when we do open it up for Q&A, you will be recorded. So if you're not willing to be recorded, please don't ask a question. I think at this point I'll turn it over to Larry Hardison, our technical advisor, for just a second to talk us through the little bit of technology we need. So.
Hello, this is Larry from the National Service Learning Clearinghouse, and I just want to tell you that if you have any questions, you can either click the little icon that looks like a hand. Your name will show up with a hand next to it, so basically you're raising your hand. Or if there's really a question that you have at the beginning of the webinar and you just don't think you're going to remember it by the end, you can always type it in the Q&A section, and we'll be able to read it and answer that question later. When we get to the Q&A section at the end, last 10 or 15 minutes, we'll call your name if your hand is raised, and then to unmute your phone, you will press *7 to ask your question, and then press *6 to mute it again. I'll repeat these later. Thanks.
So we also have with us Tracy Seabolt from Learn and Serve America. She's going to talk to us for just a second about the Serve America Act priorities that are influencing some of what we're doing in the country and some of what Kathy will be talking with us about today. And then Kathy will take it away after that.
Great. Thanks, Liberty. And I would just like to echo Liberty's thanks to everyone for taking time out of your Veterans Day acknowledgments and celebrations, and also thank Kathy for being here to present this wonderful information. And also to thank the National Service Learning Clearinghouse for hosting the webinar and the National Service Learning Partnership for co-sponsoring this event with the Clearinghouse as part of the 2010 National Learn and Serve Challenge outreach. We all are hoping that the content presented will help you align your service learning activities with these national service priorities that I'll be discussing, and deeply engage throughout the Learn and Serve Challenge and develop high-quality service learning that produces fabulous results. So thank you all for being here. As I said, and as Liberty said, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of these national priorities that are referenced in the title. They were pulled directly from the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act that was signed into law April of 2009. And the Serve America Act stipulates that national service should focus on areas of national need and specifically identified education, energy conservation, health, economic opportunity, and disaster services as top priorities. And it also stated that engaging veterans as participants in and recipients of service are a priority. So as a Corporation for National and Community Services looking to increase our impact in communities, we're focusing the efforts of all of our programs in these 6 key areas. And with that in mind, and with input from experts and thought leaders from across the field, we have developed draft key objectives for these social impact focus areas. And again, these are draft and subject to change over the next several months until they are made final. But right now what we're working on in the way of education is to improve graduation rates for students and improve grade level performance. Under Healthy Futures, our goal is to improve the health and wellness of individuals in the areas of obesity prevention, aging in place, and access to health services. Environmental stewardship, our focus is on reducing the consumption of fossil fuels and improving at-risk ecosystems. Looking at veterans, the objective is to increase economic, education, and health opportunities for veterans and military families by leveraging national service, including veterans serving veterans. And in the way of opportunity, we want to try to improve financial stability, access to affordable housing, and employment opportunities for economically vulnerable families. And then the last category, disaster services, We want to increase the capacity of communities to serve vulnerable populations in the event of disaster and improve communities in disaster-affected areas. So in order to help the service and service learning fields address these priorities, Cathryn has offered to present today's content. Much of this is conveniently aligned to her recently published second edition of the Complete Guide to Service Learning, and it provides some very specific ideas that, again, are aligned to these social impact focus areas, and I think they will help you implement service learning in these various areas. So, in order to get this information out to you, I'm going to stop talking and pass the speaker on to Kathy. So, without further ado, I present you with Cathryn Berger Kaye.
Greetings, everyone. Can you hear me? Let's see. Hello. I'm hoping I can be heard.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Thanks. Welcome and thank you very much for your time, and thanks to all the folks who helped make this happen. It's wonderful to be here and to be sharing these ideas. And as Tracy said, we're going to be looking at the Complete Guide to Service Learning as a vehicle to helping to meet these priorities. And to do so, we're going to be looking at specifically the 5 stages of service learning. Because as a process, we know this works, and the research affirms that this is part of what we can do to make sure that students are involved, whatever grade level we're working at, and how to really make sure the process maximizes the kind of results we want in terms of student engagement, reduced dropout, and all the rest. So to start with, we're going to just talk just briefly about the idea that what we're looking at here is that we're really looking at how we take words. That's what we use with students every day, is the concept of words and language. And that used to be enough with school. We used to have a lot of words floating around to young people and our students, whether they're in 3rd grade or college. And that seemed to be the focus. But what we've seen is that words really do need to create ideas. And that's where we've been working on for many years, but then we've learned in the service field that even ideas are enough. What we really want to do is move young people to action, and I see that word action was actually supposed to be elsewhere, but that's part of the changes we might see on this PowerPoint. Action's supposed to be over on the other side, but we get the idea. So the idea that words lead to ideas and action is what we want to emphasize as we're moving through the service learning process and how we can do that. Now, one of the vehicles for getting there is the recent book that is now in its 2nd edition. And if you have a copy of the book with you, do have it in your hands, as we're going to be going through different pages and different resources in the book that will help you with your service learning process. Now, the book is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is a service learning handbook in 3 chapters. It talks about what is service learning and really reviews the process systemically so you can really see what the different standards are, what the stages are, and different questions that most people have as they're really implementing service learning. You know, how do you engage young people? How do you make sure academic curriculum is being met, and so forth. The 2nd chapter is a blueprint, and it takes it more to more advanced level. It really looks at what does the process break down to be in its more bite-sized pieces. So that really brings out all the different nuances of service learning, from how do you create community partners, how do you maintain youth voice, and so on. And then there's the 3rd chapter. It really talks about when you're looking at the themes of service, 6 of which have been discussed as being the national priorities, how do you really look at that and use this book? And also, how do you tie in literature? Using books, whether it's fiction or not fiction, as you'll see, is really an imperative part of the service learning process. The 2nd part of the book is 13 thematic chapters, including topics such as the environment, healthy lives, healthy choices, safe and strong communities, which weave in aspects about veterans and their involvement in what we're doing, hunger, homelessness, and poverty, which deals with economic opportunity, and emergency readiness. Also literacy, which deals with education. So you'll see that those themes have many resources in the book that you can keep referring to again and again. Part 3 is brand new in this edition, and it's how do you create a culture of service. In here you find advanced theories and many resources for ongoing professional development. Now, in each book, there's also a CD-ROM that has an additional 200-plus pages. These are a lot of the forums that you're going to see in a moment, and the forums are extremely useful as organizers. The CD-ROM also has author interviews and many other resources you can use. So you really end up between the two with a 500-page compendium of service learning. So what we're going to be looking at now is what are the time-saving insights and tools you can find in this book that will help you in the process. And this will really get you the skills you need to meet all of these priorities in a more effective way. So when we look at it overall, let's first start just with the concept of service learning. And we see here that there's a heart over the word service, and I always start with that because what we know is that the service aspect connects with the affective part of the learner. So what we really wanted is make sure that we are aware of that. However, we must include that academic piece of the learning. And that little design there, that five-shaped, pentagon, is supposed to represent a crown. So this learning is the crowning experience in this process. It keeps us open-minded as a crown will be, and these two go together. Now, when we look at theory of brain research, we can find out that all through adolescence, and adolescence goes up to the age 25, adolescents from children through all the way through college, if they're graduating by 25, young people take in information from their affective to the cognitive. So that's part of why service learning works so well. The service is like a portal, like a Harry Potter portal. When we take things in from that angle, we really want to learn more. I was recently, actually just 2 days ago, working with students in Hong Kong. And I asked the students, I said, when you care about the subject matter you're going to be learning in school, how much more are you involved? And they said, completely. I said, if you don't care what happens, they said they don't want to give their all. They don't want to give hardly anything. So we know that if students or any of us care about what we're learning, that our learning will be of a higher caliber. Now, it would be great if the service learning movement could take kind of credit for this concept, but I think Aristotle said it best several years ago when stated, education of the mind without education of the heart is no education at all. So when we think of that, we see how service learning really does tie in that affective and the cognitive part and really brings us together. The other key piece of service learning that I'd like to keep in mind is while we always want to make sure that content is going on, we also want to be aware that this is very skill-driven. Now, what we want to do, especially to keep young people embedded in school and engaged with the institution and being successful, is we want to use service learning as a vehicle to learn skills that are transferable to other academic situations and to real life as well. So you'll see on page 241 in the book that there's a list of these skills. And when we keep this in mind as we're moving through the process we'll be talking about, we'll see exactly how service learning does this. In all my workshops, I always have teachers brainstorm what are the skills students need in order to be successful. And when we focus our service learning in part on developing those skills, we really do make a tremendous impact and give kids the abilities they have that they need in order to succeed. Now, we'll be going through different content areas of the work to make sure we get there. And one of the key areas I said I would address is the academic connections that are necessary for service learning success. And we know that these are part of the K-12 standards is linking to the curriculum. Now, when we approach this, there are 5 different areas for entry into service learning when we're looking at curriculum. The first is we look at identifying an existing event that is already going on your campus or your school, and you want to take that and turn that into a real service learning. We all know that we can have an event on campus, whether it's a Jump for Heart or a food drive, that has very little to do with the real service learning experience and the learning part. So how do we do that? How do we make that transformation? We also can begin with content and skills. What are the themes of my study and what skills do I want students to make sure they master? And also we can begin with themes. In a classroom they might have the theme of interdependence, or they may have a theme of leadership, or a theme of environmental impact. So when we have a theme, that's another way to launch into service learning. 2 additional points of entry are student voice and also a community need. A student might come in and say, there's a fire in my neighborhood. What can I do about it? And the teacher says, well, we really can't address that. Now open your book to page 35 for your lesson. That would miss a huge opportunity, that learning moment, for a teacher to take what was on page 35 and weave that into the need that the student has expressed. So they study about emergency readiness and then weave in the science or math or English that they plan to do. Also, when there's a community need, if students identify something going through a newspaper article or from something they observe or from an ongoing community contact, that's another way in. Now, you'll note that on these pages, you'll see in red, CGSL. That notes the page that this is referenced in the Complete Guide to Service Learning for additional information. In this case, it's page 241. Now, I'd like to take a moment to look at an opportunity that could present itself for an existing event and how you would transform that. In this case, we're going to look at the classic canned food drive. Now, in a canned food drive, very often in schools all around America and all around the world, in fact, all too often, the food drive is set up as a community service experience. In that case, it very often looks like students bring in food, just because it's like an announcement on a PA system, everybody bringing the food, and that's all that's told. Just drop it in the box by the office. and they bring in the food, and then it's often set up as a competition. I'm sure many of you have seen that happen. And so the food drive is set up as competition, and the winning class gets a pizza party. And what we find when it's done that way is that students are thinking more about winning and about themselves than the actual situation of hunger that's going on that they're trying to address in the community. And this doesn't really work, and we know that in the service learning field that that's not effective. So what are the ways that we can address that? One of the tools that I use very often in helping teachers really understand the concept of academic connections is this tool that we will see here. On the left is a tool called Across the Curriculum. And this is one of my favorite tools to use, and it's, you can reference it on the CD-ROM, and you'll see it's explained on page 249 is how you use this in professional development. What I do typically is I get teachers, let's say in a library somewhere with tables, and they're sitting usually in small groups, and we could take the concept of hunger, homelessness, and poverty and write that right in the middle. And then during that time, just 4 or 5 minutes, I just ask teachers to brainstorm. If we wanted to transform the food drive into something related to academics, how could we do this? And in a moment, like in the upper left-hand corner, it says English and language arts. The upper one in the middle is social studies and history. To the right, languages. You have math, science, computer and technology, physical education, theater, music, and visual arts. In a few minutes of teachers brainstorming, you will find high-quality ideas there. And what's most important is it's their ideas. It's not what another teacher told them to do, or an administrator, or an expert, or a consultant that comes in. No, it's their ideas that are generated. Now, if a teacher teaches a subject that's not listed on the page, I say just add another box, because that can happen in many cases. Now, in the book, The Complete Guide to Service Learning, are 13 of these across the curriculum documents already filled out, like the one you see on your. So there are a lot of ideas that are presented in the book, but what's most important is people start creating their own ideas. Now, all during this webinar, I really do hope if you have questions that come up while I'm discussing and presenting these ideas, please list them in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to read them and integrate your questions and answers as we move forward. So if you are doing an in-service or want to influence teachers right now about the food drive that's about to get started in many, many schools, use this document in a staff meeting, and you'll see very quickly we can drop the competition and move to collaboration, which is what we wanted in the first place. We really do need to remove the competitive element for service learning and get down to the theme of service that we're discussing. Now, when we look at the K-12 service learning standards, as you'll see noted here, we do know that all of these are effective in making service happen. And in my book, I have these listed on page 14. Now, the order they're listed in here is not the order that they're typically represented by the National Youth Leadership Council in their documents or even in the book. But this is the sequence that I've learned from researchers have the greatest impact on the service learning results, starting with duration and intensity, which really translate into the 5 stages of service learning. Now, we've talked a bit about linking to the curriculum, and the next topic we're going to discuss is youth voice and choice and how important that is. Now, when I do workshops with teachers and I present these 8 concepts, what I often do is say, at the very beginning, which of these seem most important? You have them just check off on their document which ones seem to matter the most. And so often, the concept they pick is youth voice and choice. But bringing that into life can be very difficult. One of the most challenging things for teachers is releasing a bit of the control. Most often, I think we will find that teachers are control freaks, and they really do like to have charge of what's going on in their room. Service learning does challenge teachers to release some of that and step a bit into the unknown, and that's what's really necessary in order to give the opportunity for young people to truly get involved. Now, what we also want to notice is that in each of the 5 stages of service learning, there are opportunities for students to show this kind of leadership and for teachers to release that kind of control. What we want to do is how do we find that? How do we start identifying it? And one of the best ways to do that is to start with clarifying the roles for success with service learning. And this is a new document in this specific book that I find is very helpful. And this evolved because I was asking teachers in workshops, think of an example of a service learning experience you've actually created for students or done with students, and who's done most of it? What's been the percentage done by teachers, and what's the percentage done by students? And the ratio is just so high of what teachers have done over students, a great deal more. I've had teachers say, well, it's 90-10 or 80-20, and that's quite, astounding when you think what we really want to get to is at least 50-50 or 30-70, and eventually, to 90-10, where students are really doing the most. So how do we break that down? First, we have to appreciate that this is where we want to go, and teachers have to recognize this. This document challenges teachers to think about which are ways that students can really be in charge of aspects of service learning that they may not have considered before. So we really want to look at that. Now, in the book, there are lists of examples of youth initiative on page 243. And on page 29, we talk about leaving room for youth voice. Now, this is very important. Now, one of the ways I like to do that is give students roles within the experience of service learning. So in this document, in the book on page 29, is a section that's called, How Can I Plan Ahead While Leaving Room for Youth Voice? It gives examples, and then it says, think about the way the experience is set up for students, and how would you break down who could be doing what? For example, you could have students as communication specialists, other groups as photographers, other groups as publicists, other groups as historians. And this is one of the ways you can build in the skill sets students need in order to do communication well, to learn how to make a phone call appropriately or make a meeting with the principal to get their sign-off on the documents that you need. So helping students learn the skills they need to meet these roles can be very impactful. Now, one of the other resources I wanted to give you is brand new. It's just been up for 2 weeks. It's the Water Planet Challenge, and it's a program designed through Earth Echo International, which is a program that's led by Philippe Cousteau, and he and I recently wrote a book together called Going Blue. Now, on this website, you can download Take Action Guides, and one of the first ones I wrote is called Cleanup. In there, it models the 5 stages of service learning and gives examples of these kinds of roles that students can take to really do a great job with their service learning. So if you're looking for a good model of giving students voice, there are examples in the book. However, the examples that set up in this Take Action Guide, Cleanup, can be very helpful. There are 2 guides right now there that you can download, and also videos about myself and Philippe discussing service learning, and that can be helpful for ongoing professional development. Now, as we're getting started, one of the most important ways to get students involved in having a voice themselves is to do an experience called personal inventory. And this is described on page 16 and also on page 25, and is a downloadable organizer on the CD-ROM. What I do is I get students in pairs, and I have them interview each other. Now, in the process of doing the interview, they're learning active listening, asking questions, and taking notes. And there's actually a document on the CD-ROM called Getting Ready for Personal Inventory that reviews these skills before you actually get started with the interview. And what I find is we cannot assume students know how to do any of these skills. I've had high school seniors who say, could you go over interviewing with me? And that is appropriate because you can imagine many high school students could get to grade 12 and never conduct an interview. But here what we're capturing is what are your interests, what are your skills and talents, when is the time you've helped someone, and when is the time someone has helped you. This is a great place to begin. Students need to feel valued. And also, once I do this inventory with the students and I create a list of that on the wall, we can keep referring to those as we're developing the service learning constructs. Students who like to organize, they can really help you with logistics. Students who really like to read or watch television can help with some of the research. Students who like to play an instrument. All these skills come into play, and we have to be patient with students in terms of sharing those skills because in some cases they've already been kind of shot down for sharing who they are in school, and we need to bring that back, and doing personal inventory is a key way to make that happen. This, to me, is the most important way to get started with service learning, to find out what are their skills, interests, and talents, and keep that going. So again, interests, skills, and talents. And when we discuss when's the time you've been helpful and received help, this also introduces the concept of reciprocity. Now, the next piece is community need. As we look into all these topics that we do want to develop, we want to make sure that we authenticate there's a real need and establish ownership. Now, one of the hazards we have when students are doing research on any topic is, first of all, if you ask any student at any grade level, what I find is they think research equals Google or any kind of web search. And that's what they think. In fact, when I asked students recently at a high school, I showed this on the board. I said, do you think this is true, research equals Google? They said, well, we know it's not true, but we act as if it is. Now, this really is not research, as you know, and so what I do dramatically with students and with teachers in workshops, I show them that research does not equal Google. What we really want to do is do active research, and there are 4 ways to do this. Research really boils down to using media, yes, but that includes not just the Internet. That also includes television, radio. It includes primary source journals and so forth. We can also do observation and experience. Where have you seen this before, or where could we go together to go see the situation in a landfill, or how could we go to a home that has a lot of veterans in it that we could interview. It involves surveys and, of course, interviews. These are 4 ways that you can do research, and this is true whether you're in 2nd grade, 8th grade, or in 12th grade or doing a PhD. These are the modalities. But students aren't exposed to this in a way that really makes it concrete to learn, and this is a critical part of social analysis. This allows students to authenticate what the need is. Of course we know there's hunger in America, but where is it in our community? These 4 methods start to reveal that, and in the process of learning transferable skills that help them do research in any other subject. All too often kids ask when you give a research assignment, how long does it have to be, or what's the word count? I don't want to hear that anymore. What I want to hear from students is which methods can I use. Recently I was in a school district and we're in Texas, and we're aligning K-12, this research method, elementary, middle, and high school. So that's the vocabulary of the entire district. And by doing so, by the time students get to 6th or 8th grade, they will understand the process of research, and that carries right over. You'll see there's 2 organizers gathering information about a community need, and I encourage you to use them. They will be so helpful in helping students break down what research is and get so excited by the process. Students jump out of their seats with this method, so give it a try. And again, if you have questions, you can post them here, or you can email me following the webinar. Now, the second stage of service learning there is preparation. So always more questions evolve during the whole process of gathering information about a community need, and we want those questions. That can help illuminate the further course of study. Now, I advise teachers that in preparation, all with their academics, they're doing all the different work they were planning to do, but now in the context of a purposeful study that will lead to action. One of the key documents I developed this last year is who is helping. What are the roles of government and community groups? Now, students can take this organizer and look at what are the roles of these different organizations, what are their websites, and ways that students can get involved. Now, even if they're not going to work on a national or international level, helping students to think of what are organizations that are out there working in these different ways helps them think broader and may lead down the road to doing things when they're coming up with their own ideas, even after college or after high school when they're being a little more entrepreneurial. But this kind of an organizer takes what they're doing in the classroom into a very concrete form of research. Also, anytime they connect with the community partners, there's a document called Community Contact Information that they can fill out. And this can help create a database for the school, so you always know the name of the convalescent home or the local school where kids are tutoring or the environmental agency that's your partner. And you keep a running list of how that communication is ongoing. And that really helps in future years or with other teachers getting started. So doing this kind of process helps students with finding out, making calls, and keeping track in the process of organizing their thinking. You know, very often we say, well, I want students to get organized, but organize is only one part. You have to be able to retrieve it. And having a retrieval system really works. How many of us have cleaned up our house and can't find anything? So organizing is only one part of it. We want to be able to organize and retrieve and use the material well. Now, on the CD-ROM, one of the key things I added this time is there are 10 voices from the field. These are essays from experts who've been doing service learning for a long time and had a real story to tell. So, for example, on the CD-ROM, one of the voices is Suzanne from Youth Service America, who's an expert in creating sustainable partnerships. So you can find her essay, the beginning part of it, an excerpt from it on page 246 in the complete guide, and the complete essay on the CD-ROM. Now, the next stage of service learning we know is action, and of course there's 4 ways to do action: direct, indirect, advocacy, and research. How do we get student voice more involved? There's some organizers in the book. The first is taking action. Once the students have identified a community need, they can use this organizer to start thinking through the parts, who else do they need to learn from and with, and what the roles are that they will have as they're planning for action. The students want to go right into action. Our job is to pull it back a little bit and make sure the plans are in place. Once they have their taking action organizer done, they're ready to create an actual proposal. Now, I actually designed this in the 1980s, if you can believe it. And this proposal was designed on the same format of writing for a grant application, because I've always thought students should and can get grants. So this teaches them the process of identifying what the need is, what's the purpose of their action, what are the roles, all the different involved folks will play, from teachers to other students to organizational partners, what outcomes are they going for, and then what supplies they need and resources, and get it signed off by a teacher and administrator or a community partner or someone they're going to provide the service to. Having a written proposal adds more credibility to who they are and what they're going to accomplish. The next document there is progress monitoring, and as you'll note, that's one of the different standards. But I don't think it's done that well. I've not seen students really doing progress monitoring. To clarify, I created an organizer that starts with the date. Let's say the students were starting November 11th. So they would write the baseline there. So, for example, if it was around the issue of hunger, they'd say our baseline is we found out that the food bank is really short on these kinds of food. We're doing a campaign. And so then along the way, there's 3 more markers to note what change do they perceive from this process. And the last one is the summary of what they found. This is what progress monitoring is, and it's very important. So students identify markers for change and know how to really read that and how to really make it happen. Now, I said I would give you time-saving tools, and my favorite one is this organizer that I developed starting around 1985 for teachers who wanted a page that they could start jotting down their service learning ideas. And those of you who are familiar with my work or have seen the first book, The Complete Guide to Service Learning, know this was a one-page organizer. But we've advanced the field and added more components, so it grew to 2 pages this time. So in this organizer, you can note the grade level involved, the essential purpose or question. You can note in any order the ideas that start following. So, for example, a teacher might know what books she wants to read in an English class or in a history program and note that under books and other media used, and from there bounce around the page so that it's really a process filling it out. Now, my only suggestion is you don't sit down and do one of these alone. You grab a few colleagues, even if those who are not experienced with service learning will easily make sense of this kind of organizer and help you fill it out. Now, things that I added specifically, you'll see on the page 1 of the document, on the left, it walks you through the stages of service learning as a place for the need and for the service ideas. And on the right, it makes sure that youth voice and choice is illuminated, and then the curriculum connections, books, skills, and community partners. Now, page 2 is quite different. It really then goes back to the standards. It says, how are students going to be exploring diversity? What are ways that they can have leadership? How will they make global connections? Now, while this is not one of the standards, I think this is very important. How will they learn about careers? Because we've found that in research, students of affinity with careers are less likely to drop out. Also, it's to ask for the duration, teacher collaboration, and so forth. Having this kind of planner really helps teachers organize their thinking, and then later can go back and really note on there what happened, because we know there will be changes along the process, but this really keeps them organized and can help find role for other teacher partners as well. Now, in the book, on Chapter 2, I do include 4 of these examples already filled out. But on the CD-ROM, you will find 39 of these plans that are completed. An elementary, middle, and high school example for every one of the 13 themes of service. So make sure you download those and use those and reference them. If you're a teacher leader in your school or doing coaching or professional development, have a printout of the entire CD-ROM when you go to work with a teacher. As you're saying, we'd like to do something around environment. You can open the notebook and have 3 plans right at the ready that you can show them. And even if they're elementary, they may find a middle or high school example that really helps them start in their planning. It may not be exactly what they're doing, but it will get them started and give them the confidence that other teachers have done this with success. So please print these out, and you'll have them at the ready and be able to use them again and again and share them with teachers. Now, the 4th stage of service learning is reflection. Now, starting on page 38 in my book, I have so many ideas about reflection. Now, when I think about reflection, I think about multiple intelligences and really varying the reflection process. In the book on page 38, I also discussed the 4-square reflection tool. Now, this has been developed actually with teacher input. My daughter's 8th grade teacher was the one who had a 2-square document. When students did service or service learning, they would come back and they would reflect on what happened. And that was really a description of what happened. That's like the reporting part that needs to happen. And the second piece was on the right, how do I feel? Now, if we use this organizer, you will start finding a better kind of thinking in the reflection process. Because all too often students go have an experience, they come back and they say, we went to the convalescent home, we met the veterans, it was good. No, that's not reflection. We really do want to break it down into the affective and the cognitive. And what you'll find as a teacher or the leader in this experience is sometimes students really don't know how to differentiate between affective and cognitive. We need to give them an emotional vocabulary so they can start connecting that in that what do I feel box and have both as two discrete areas. Now, I was doing this workshop with teachers years ago, and someone said, well, if we have 2 squares, maybe we should have 4. Maybe we talk about what are the ideas and what are the questions, and that teacher was right on the money. When we look at what are our ideas, we're telling students we welcome their ideas, and we encourage them to have ideas. Now, sometimes teachers say to me, have ideas about what? It could go in any direction. It could have ideas about the topic of emergency readiness. It could be an idea about how to better organize the time when they go to a site. What we want to do is start generating ideas. And also their questions. What are the questions they have about hunger? What are the questions they have about employment rates and why they are as they are? We want students to generate questions. That's very key in this whole process of service learning. Now, the 5th stage of service learning is demonstration. And this is when you take the totality of what the students have done and really have students express it. So, for example, what we want there is the process of learning articulated. I think all too often students don't know how they learn. How many times has a teacher been asked after giving an assignment, what do you want me to do? That is not the question we want. That makes it apparent that students have not discussed the whole process of learning enough. So what we want to do is make learning explicit. I want a student to be able to say when I ask, well, how did you learn about this topic? And I want them to say, well, we interviewed an expert on veteran affairs, and then we went to a convalescent facility, or we went to an active elder center, and we were able to interview some elders, and then I read a book on the topic. This is what I want students to be able to do, is know how they learned, so in a new situation, they can learn again. Now, we also want them to talk about the findings, what they discovered in the process. Having done the progress monitoring document will help the students know what their baseline was and what they discovered along the way. Also doing that community needs in the manner that I described, looking at media, survey, observation, experience, and interviews helps so much and illuminate different kinds of learning. We want that to be discussed as well. And then in some form, students publicly communicate this information. It could be a letter home to parents, a photo display that's out as people are entering a football game. It could be an article in a newspaper. It can be so many different ways we communicate, but we want students to take the lead. Again, going back to their skills and talents. We draw upon those again in demonstration as we do all through the service learning process. So we want to make sure that we articulate how they learned, articulate the findings, and public communication. I just want to mention, I did receive a question, will we get a copy of this PowerPoint and other material? There's supposed to be a few documents that are available for download, and this will be put within 2 weeks into a YouTube video, and you will have access to that, and that will include my commentary and the PowerPoint. So you will get a copy of this following in a few weeks. Again, as we do demonstration, it's so critical to integrate the skills and talents. This becomes the thread throughout the service learning process. People say, how do you keep students involved? How do you keep them motivated? And you just go back to the skills and talents. As students see that they are people of value and that their skills and talents are being integrated, we know that this, their attachment to the process will be stronger with good reason. Now, in the book, there are other things to discover that will help you in the process of service learning. One is there's a blueprint that reviews the process and all the different forms and documents on page 22 and 23. So those 2 pages really helps you look at, okay, where do I start and what do I do next? It's fabulous if you're leading a teacher education program, for example, and you have pre-service teachers and they need a real step-by-step guide. On the CD-ROM, that document is also provided as a discrete handout. And on page 22 and 23, you'll see that there's an overview. It talks about step 1, points of entry. Step 2, review the standards. Step 3, map out your plans. Step 4, clarify partnerships. Step 5, review plans and gather resources. Step 6, begin the process of service learning in action. And step 7 is assessment. So you'll see this whole blueprint that goes on and explains these steps and what documents in the book can help you get there. Another key part is I have different examples of ways to improve education in general. I've done a whole curriculum called Strategies for Success with Literacy, a learning curriculum that really illuminates for the teachers different ways to engage students with everyday strategies that really help students keep the relevance alive in the learning process. So, for example, if you're having success with speakers, You can start with resumes. How many times has a speaker come in that you've not really prepared for that speaker, and students think of a speaker as a sleep time? So we want students to get the resume ahead of time, develop their own questions, and so forth. So there's a whole explanation on how to success the speakers on page 24. And on that page, you'll find, all throughout the book, you'll find boxes with wonderful tips on education strategies you can use in a variety of ways in service learning and other methods that you're teaching. Also, it's important to go global, even with ideas. So you'll see 2 pages discussing this beginning on page 43. And in Chapter 17, I just want to reiterate, this is a chapter that's all about moving your school or district forward with key concepts of really infusing service learning within that culture and climate of your school. So this really takes the whole idea of service learning to a sustainable level, and that's something we really want to reach. So make sure you look at Chapter 17 for that. And all of this process brings learning to life. Now, what I'd like to take a moment is review some thematic chapter information, what you're going to find in each of those themes. And then we're going to look at how this can really translate with the different topics that we talked about, those 6 topics, specifically with literature. Now, if you open, for example, there's a theme on the environment, or on safe and strong communities, healthy lives, healthy choices, emergency readiness, you will see, or the literacy chapter, you will see that they each begin with a quote. For example, let's take the one on the environment. It begins with a quote from John Muir. When one tugs at a single thing in nature, one finds it attached to the rest of the world. Now, I'm big on quotes. You'll find quotes all throughout this book. And as you do, if you look on page 57, there's a whole series of ideas on how to use the quotes and use them in many different kinds of ways with students. It's great for literacy, skill building, and so forth. Following the opening quote is a short narrative that just really gives you some ideas on why I selected that topic and why I frame it in this way. And then there are 2 preparation activities. For example, in the environment chapter, there's one section on moving from litter reduction to simply using less. And it gives you 5 bullet points on ideas that you can do, starting from creating a school survey to identify litter hotspots, to using certain books, to establishing a litter-free zone, to having students come up with ideas for using rather than buying more. Then the second part is on the climate change and global warming challenge. It gives facts and a process to get students engaged and looking at local issues related to climate change and global warming. So each thematic chapter will have these ideas for you, healthy lives, healthy choices, and so on. Also in the book are websites that can give you and your students more resources to learn more. Following that is the cross-curricular web that we talked about earlier across the curriculum for that specific area. And following that are service learning scenarios. From kindergarten to grade 12, there's 15 to 20 examples of what teachers have done, whether it's turning students in a middle school in Louisiana into environmental heroes, to a project all about water use, to a service learning experience students did in reclamation of water, to where students established a mobile science classroom, to lessons from trash. Each of these gives a synopsis of what teachers have done and are just great for generating ideas within your classroom. Also, there is literature, and that's really key, and I'd like to talk about that for a few minutes. Each thematic section has a bookshelf, a list of books that will get your students reading and thinking about literature in big ways. We all know the statistics on the reduction of people reading for pleasure. This is not good. We really need to get students reading, and the way to do it is to get books in their hands that can excite them. So I'd like to share with you a bit about that whole process and how we can do it. Now, in each bookshelf, and if you read Chapter 3, you'll get so much more on literature, there's a chart with sub-themes. So, for example, I just said, here's a whole set of books on the environment. That would be quite difficult for you. But if I break it down into categories such as learning from history, overview of the environment, natural resources, recycling, and appreciation and activism into 6 different categories, it's going to make it easier for you to find the books you need. Also, each book is listed as N for nonfiction, P for picture books, F for fiction, and GN for graphic novels. Students love graphic novels, and all of these are hand-picked books. I work with publishers to make sure that I get the books that are the newest ones, that are really engaging for students, and I read every book, and for each one, then I write a synopsis, an annotation of what the book is about, and I tell you what grade level it is appropriate for. grades are not listed for picture books, but please note that picture books are great for every grade level. Now, on the CD-ROM, there are more books because we ran out of room in the chapters. So there are more books, even new books, made it to the CD-ROM. So make sure you look at that, and along with them are more annotations and recommendations. I have taken about 20 of the books, and with help from colleagues, written descriptions of how these can really translate into service learning. So if you're reading Make Way for Ducklings or Romeo and Juliet or The Road, you will find examples of how they can be used in service learning, all on the CD-ROM. And also you will find author interviews with 28 authors on why they wrote their book. And that's fantastic for getting students involved in the whole idea of being a writer as they read why an author wrote a book, especially one on a service learning theme. So I'd like to share with you a couple of examples of books. This one is The Wartville Wizard, one of my favorites, and it can be really fabulous to get kids of all ages engaged. It's about a fellow named the Wizard Don Matt, and the author said it's really about him. It's about someone who's so fed up with trash that Mother Nature finally gives pity on him, and all he has to do is point to the trash, and it actually goes to stick to the person who threw it. Now, this is a hilarious romp, and people always love this book at all grade levels. And I've actually written 4 picture books as plays, and you're welcome to email me at my address, and I'll show that on the last slide. You can email me, and I'm glad to send you copies of all my plays. 2 are on bullying. One is on the canned food drive, and one is on loneliness. Great for Valentine's Day. But this book I will not write as a play because kids have. Middle school students in Oklahoma turned it into a play. They said it was an exercise in Velcro and fishing line, and every student wanted to be the teenager. And students in Albion, New York, wrote the play as a musical. And this is their cast photo, just to show you how exciting service learning can be when you turn it into theater. You can see the girl with the trash on her behind in the slide on the left. But you'll see that using theater with kids is a great way to get them doing the messaging on issues that matter. They have a great time. There's a tremendous amount of learning going on in writing a book into a play. And the school is actually located close to where the author lives, and they invited him to come, but instead he sent an illustrated drawing of the Wartville Wizard. Now, on the theme of environment, I'd like to share with you 3 more books. One is The Curse of the Cod.
This is Tracy. Can I interrupt you for just 1 second? Because I know we're getting close toward the end of the time for the webinar, and I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of the time and had time to really allow folks to see how this tool could be used to help them connect with the national priorities as well as address some of the questions that might come from the audience. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of the time.
Yeah, I am. I'm just going to take another 2 minutes and fly through some books because I think they'll be helpful with the priorities, and then we'll get started with questions.
Thank you.
Just a minute. Just want you to know these 3 books are extremely helpful. The Suzanne Weyn book called Empty is brand new, and it's a dystopian novel that students are really drawn towards and really deals with the issue of fossil fuels and how that is at risk. We've got 2 books that relate to veterans, Love Lizzie, Letters to a Military Mom, and a novel about a young man serving in Fallujah. We have books, one on the left, Hurricane Song. It's about a young man and his father living in New Orleans during the hurricane and being in the Superdome, and an example, Tsunami, of how volunteers have been helpful in international crises. 3 great books on education. I'll highlight 2. Deborah Ellis's book on Jake Man and How Lincoln Learned to Read. It shows how students in and out of school through time, through slavery, through Elvis, have learned how to read. And we have issues of health, which are very important. We've got Seed Folks here, which is on gardening, which I think is an excellent book. We've got Food for Thought, which shows the history of food. And Last Night I Sang to the Monster is a book that really highlights drug use and how young people are needing to understand the dangers and perils there. And then An Opportunity Messed Up is about a young man struggling to gain his education, a young girl struggling with the idea of living in a shelter, and If I Had a Hammer is chronicling the Habitats for Humanity situation. Now, in the book, you'll find other resources and ways people have used this to really advance their service learning. I would like to open this up to questions now. Tracy, do you want to get that started, and we'll see what else we can resolve here and answer?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kathy. Yes, and we have had 1 question during the presentation from Peter Kohler. So, Peter, if you want to unmute your line and ask your question.
To unmute your line, Peter, you can press *7.
Peter, are you there?
Well, we may have lost them. Is there anyone else with a question at this point?
If anyone else has a question, you can click on the raise hand icon, and we will call on you.
Hi, this is Liberty with a question, and I didn't raise my hand, so I'm one of those bad.
Uh-oh.
Kathy, I know you get to travel all over the country and all over the world presenting this material. I wonder if you could give us just a couple examples of how you've seen folks connecting with any of those focus areas, especially the ones that are least familiar to some of us, perhaps the veterans or.
Yes, with the veterans, there's been some wonderful work done. For example, in Hawaii, students were really, there's some centers that some of the veterans go to all the time, almost every day. And students have gone there to keep them company, to play cards, to get to know them, and also to gather their history. And I know we've heard that a lot, gathering history, but that's really imperative at this point. That we look at that every community has a story that must be told or could be lost with the passing of the generations. And when students really take that on, we really get some great examples in libraries and in archives and on internet sites. I remember years ago, actually in the early 80s, a teacher called, well actually it was the early 90s, where a teacher called from Tennessee, and she said she had first grade students, and for 18 years they've been chronicling the lives of elders in their community and putting them in the library for 18 years. Gathering the stories of our veterans is really critical to honoring who they are, and also can make keepsakes for their families. So of all the examples, what you can do, I think that really matters. Also, Creekwood Middle School in Humble, Texas, put on this photo display for their community and honored all their veterans, working with a fellow from Michigan who had taken photographs of the last surviving World War I veterans. There's still one fellow, Frank Buckles, living in the D.C. area, and as part of that, they were raising money to make sure the monument is refurbished for World War I veterans. So there are things students can do around veterans, honoring who they are, remembering their stories, and doing things that create tributes. In Albany, New York, they actually created a monument for veterans and went through a process also to get diplomas for some of the veterans who were not able to graduate because of the war. So those were great, all of those examples. Students could do at many grade levels. Now, in terms of healthy lives, healthy choices, and dealing with issues of health, I think that's also an imperative right now. I've seen students starting exercise programs in their community, getting kids walking, creating walking paths, working with local parks and recreation, and creating gardens, and creating awareness. I've actually seen students even helping work with local supermarkets to make displays more friendly for fruits and vegetables. A group in Hawaii just did this, where sixth graders went into a supermarket and worked with the manager there to make the displays of locally grown food more attractive for customers. I love that idea. Should I keep going with ideas, or are there any other questions out there before? I'm glad to keep going with that. Anyone else?
I don't see any additional hands raised right now. Does anyone else have a question? If not, then Kathy can definitely keep sharing how we can connect with these various areas.
This is Liberty quickly. I have seen one more question come in about the Foursquare reflection tool. Could you just tell us, Kathy, one more time about what those squares contain?
Yes, the Foursquare contains each square. The first one says what happened. Students do need to report back what happened. So, for example, if students were doing tutoring, which is always important in communities, they really do need, though, however, to have the tutoring skills. I'm not a big fan of let's just go read to younger kids without reviewing the skills. And in the chapter I wrote on literacy, in the section on preparation, there's tips on how to do tutoring programs so students are really involved. So, for example, you do a personal inventory experience with your tutee to know what their interest, skills, and talents are so you can incorporate those. So when students come back from having some experience, or even in the planning process for service learning, we can stop and do reflection. So the first part is what happened. That's when we want students to report what they did and the different, we went on a field trip to this park and we actually started cleaning up or whatever that was. On the other side, they need to discuss how I felt. This is really critical. I remember years ago when my daughter actually completed this form, on the what happened side, it sounded like everything had gone very well, but how she felt side, you really got to see that she was disappointed about certain aspects. So it's very important that we talk about what happened to give students a place to express their emotions. So what happened? How do I feel? And the last two boxes ask for ideas, question mark, and questions, question mark. What are the ideas that I have now from having had this experience? Or in the planning process, what are my ideas that will keep me going? And what questions do I have? Always having these four articulated are great. Now, students don't come up with these ideas. Let's say they're filling it out and they're not really clear on it. Have them work in small groups and think together. Often I do the 1-minute think tank. Turn to the person next to you. You've got 1 minute to come up with an idea or come up with a question. I often use that to engender that process of coming up with new ideas. Kids all too often in our schools are told what to think and aren't given opportunities to think, so it's not really surprising that sometimes they're not really sure how to answer. But I found this forum, and teachers have used this forum for years, and it's extremely effective in getting kids looking at reflection from 4 different angles. Are there any other questions? Liberty, you're doing a great job with questions. Anyone else?
This is Peter. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my question was, is there a current site available for students to connect with each other and talk about similar projects that they're doing?
That's a great question. And there's a brand new website that just went up. It's called randomkid.org, and still getting some kinks out, but it's a great place for students to post some of their projects and get kids from around the world working together on the same projects. And that's kind of exciting. So randomkid.org, randomkid.org. And there's going to be more portals for kids to talk and share what they're doing. Right now, it's still coming in layers, so that's one place. I'm not aware of a lot of other places that you will find that, but if you do email me that question, and there's my email address up there, I'm very glad to get back to you and do a little digging in and see what's really up right now for that process. I know there are a couple out there, but we can find them and get back to you.
Thank you.
Peter, this is Tracy Siebold. I'd like to actually add to Kathy's answer and encourage you to send your students to youth site, which is on the National Service Learning Clearinghouse's site. It is a youth portal that has content for youth, that is designed by youth, and one of the things we've tried to do is capture stories about service learning and get young people to talk about their experiences. So as that grows, that will definitely be another one of these areas where folks can go to talk about their projects.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, Peter. We really need more of those that have good controls on them so kids are safe to share what they're doing and so forth. So I know smaller groups that have them around certain themes and project ideas. DoSomething.org has long been a portal for teenagers, but I'm not sure if they really have the conversation aspect up. Any other questions?
I don't see any other ones listed here at this point. If anybody else has another quick question, we can certainly address it in a few minutes that we have left here. And if not, Kathy, if you have any closing thoughts, by all means.
Well, I think what we're finding is these 6 areas are so important, we really need to find ways to get kids involved in thoughtful actions. One I'd like to share with you that I didn't share before is for disaster service. This is one of my favorite examples that came out of Florida, an area that's hit by hurricanes. And this is an example of how easy service learning can really be and how sensible. And this was in a 3rd grade class where students were thinking, what could they really do to make something meaningful for their families? And as you know, hurricanes, almost every week for a while there. So what the students did, so they realized that their families didn't have their documents, their important documents, in a safe place. So they took a giant envelope and they designed a giant envelope that they could get things printed on it. And they printed on this giant envelope, and they made thousands of them for the community, the documents that you should have inside there. So it was like a checklist. You have your insurance papers and your this papers and your that papers, which is great. But because kids also care about animals, they had all this information that they gathered about how to take care of animals in the case of an emergency. And on the other side, they had other tips of games and little things you can pack in an emergency kit so kids don't get bored if they have to go to a shelter. This was a 2-sided envelope that was so helpful and so smart. And then the students had copies made and distributed throughout the school community and the larger community. So here again, these were 3rd graders who came up with something authentic that they knew would be helpful. and distribute it all around the community, and it made tremendous impact. So I think what we have to see is that in every case, students can be the ones to come up with good ideas. We just have to sometimes step out of the way and give them the opportunity to think about the needs, to examine them from different vantage points, and to give them the background information from literature and other ways so that they can really come up with something that can be meaningful. In my book, The Complete Guide to Service Learning, there's tons of ideas. I'm glad to provide additional ideas in future webinars, and also if you email me any specific questions, I'm really glad to be involved. So I'd like to thank you all for signing up and joining us today, and if there's any other questions, I'll turn this back over to Tracy.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. I still don't see any additional questions. I would like to just tag on to what we were talking about earlier with opportunities for young people to share what they're doing. Some of you may already be familiar with the online service learning game Interrobang that there was the first version of that took place last spring. The next version of that is going to be launching in 10 days, 6 hours, 25 minutes, and 36 seconds, literally. You can find out more about that at playinterrobang.com. It's playinterrobang.com. And it is an online problem-solving game that has service learning missions built within. And young people are creating a lot of these missions, and then they are having an opportunity to dialogue about them and reflect on what they're doing to improve their community. So I encourage you to look at that space as well. In addition, obviously, the National Service Learning Clearinghouse is definitely your go-to place for additional information and for replays of this and the documents that we shared, the PowerPoint, and the links for the YouTube video as well, or the YouTube version of it. And then the other piece that I'd just like to remind you is that we are in the midst of the National Learn and Serve Challenge, and so if you haven't already, I encourage you to accept the challenge and engage in ways to promote service learning throughout these next several months as the challenge gets underway and grows and culminates in the spring. Spread the word about the power of service learning and grow those service learning programs so that we are definitely deepening the practice. And keep up the fabulous work. And again, my deep thanks to Kathy, to you, to the Clearinghouse, and to the partnership for making this webinar a reality. I appreciate everything that you all have done to make today happen, and thank you again to all of you for participating. It's been great.
Thank you all. Take good care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye, Nara.
The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end.